In the affluent suburbs of Phoenix, Arizona, a 72-year-old retired bank executive was about to turn her daughter-in-law's casual cruelty into the most expensive mistake of her life. What began as a simple request for temporary housing after a kitchen fire would spiral into a calculated financial reckoning that would expose decades of manipulation, greed, and the dangerous assumption that elderly family members have no power left to wield. Eleanor, Ellie Patterson, wasn't your typical grandmother. For 40 years, she had navigated the cutthroat world of commercial lending, approving and denying loans worth millions of dollars. She understood leverage, she recognized financial vulnerability, and she had an encyclopedic knowledge of real estate law that would soon prove more valuable than any inheritance. When Stephanie told her she was in the way, Ellie had no idea she was speaking to someone who held the keys to their entire financial future. What happened next would transform a family crisis into a masterclass in strategic revenge, where experience, connections, and carefully applied pressure would teach one young woman that some people are far too dangerous to dismiss. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The acrid smell of smoke still clung to Eleanor Patterson's clothes as she stood on the sidewalk watching firefighters emerge from what had been her kitchen just 3 hours earlier. The electrical fire had been contained to one room, but the water damage had spread throughout her Phoenix Ranch home, making it uninhabitable for at least 6 weeks according to the fire chief's preliminary assessment. At 72, Ellie had faced plenty of crises during her 4 decades as a senior loan officer at Desert Financial Trust, but there was something uniquely unsettling about watching strangers traipse through the home she'd lived in for 35 years, cataloging damage with the detached efficiency of people who saw house fires every day. "Mrs. Patterson?" The young insurance adjuster approached with a tablet and the overly sympathetic expression of someone trained to deliver unwelcome news. "I've completed my initial assessment. You're looking at minimum 6 weeks for restoration, possibly 8 depending on what we find when they start the demo work." Ellie nodded, her banker's mind already calculating the inconvenience in practical terms. Hotel costs, restaurant meals, the logistics of temporary living. She had the resources to handle it, certainly, but at her age, the disruption felt more daunting than the expense. Her phone buzzed with a text from her son Michael. "Saw the news report. Are you okay? Where are you staying?" She typed back quickly, "Fine. House needs work. Figuring out logistics." The response came almost immediately. "Stay with us. We have plenty of room." For a moment, Ellie felt a rush of warmth toward her only child. Michael had always been thoughtful, even as a boy. The kind of son who remembered birthdays without prompting and called every Sunday evening. His wife Stephanie was another matter entirely, but surely during a family emergency, personal differences could be set aside. An hour later, Ellie pulled her silver Mercedes into the circular driveway of Michael and Stephanie's sprawling Scottsdale home. The house was a monument to success, all soaring windows and designer landscaping, the kind of place that appeared in luxury real estate magazines. She knew because she'd helped them secure the mortgage 3 years ago, using her banking connections to navigate some creative financing that had made the $850,000 purchase possible, despite Michael's fluctuating freelance income. Michael emerged from the front door before she'd fully parked, his familiar face creased with concern. At 45, he still looked remarkably like the earnest teenager who'd worried about everything from homework assignments to whether his baseball teammates liked him. Some things, Ellie reflected, never changed. "Mom, I'm so sorry about the house." He wrapped her in a hug that smelled like the expensive cologne Stephanie had probably chosen for him. "Are you sure you're okay? You didn't inhale too much smoke?" "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just tired and a little overwhelmed." She pulled back to study his face, noting the lines around his eyes that hadn't been there during his last visit to her house 6 months ago. "How are you holding up? You look stressed." Something flickered across Michael's expression before he smoothed it away. "Just work stuff. You know how it is with clients. Always demanding everything yesterday." Ellie did know, though Michael's work as a freelance marketing consultant seemed to generate more stress than the corporate lending position he'd left 5 years ago. That career change had been Stephanie's idea, sold as an opportunity for Michael to, quote, build something of his own, rather than working for other people's dreams. Ellie had bitten her tongue then, recognizing the move for what it was, a way for Stephanie to control their social narrative by making Michael seem more entrepreneurial than he actually was. Stephanie appeared in the doorway as they approached, her smile bright and perfectly practiced. At 41, she maintained the kind of aggressive fitness that spoke of personal trainers and carefully managed calories. Her blonde highlights were fresh, her makeup flawless despite the fact that it was barely 10 in the morning. "Eleanor, what a terrible thing to happen. But you'll be so comfortable here while they fix everything." Stephanie's embrace was brief and somehow managed to avoid actual physical contact, despite going through all the motions. "I've put you in the guest room downstairs. It has its own bathroom and everything." The guest room was lovely in the way that catalog showrooms were lovely. Perfectly coordinated, completely impersonal, and clearly designed for appearances rather than comfort. Ellie set her overnight bag on the pristine white bedspread and surveyed the space that would be her home for the next 6 to 8 weeks. "The room is beautiful, dear. Thank you for having me." "Of course. Family helps family." Stephanie's tone carried the practiced warmth of someone who said the right things without necessarily meaning them. "I just want to make sure you're comfortable during your stay. There are some house guidelines that might help things run smoothly." The word guidelines sent a small chill down Ellie's spine. In her banking career, she'd learned that anyone who needed to establish rules for basic human interaction usually had control issues that ran deeper than mere preference. Guidelines? Nothing complicated. Just little things to help us all coexist peacefully. Stephanie pulled out her phone and began reading from what appeared to be a prepared list. Breakfast is usually wrapped up by 8:30, since Michael has early client calls. The main living areas are best kept tidy, since we never know when someone might stop by for business. And I do most of my work calls from the home office in the afternoons, so quieter activities during that time would be appreciated. Each item was delivered with the same bright smile, as if Stephanie were sharing helpful hints rather than establishing boundaries designed to minimize Ellie's presence in the common areas of the house. "I wouldn't want to interfere with your routine," Ellie said carefully. "Perhaps I should look into extended stay hotels. There are some nice ones closer to my house that would be more convenient for overseeing the repairs." "Absolutely not." Michael appeared in the doorway, clearly having caught the tail end of their conversation. "Mom, you're staying here. Steph's just trying to help everyone feel comfortable, aren't you, babe?" Stephanie's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course. I just want Eleanor to understand how we live so she doesn't feel awkward about anything." That evening, Ellie began to understand exactly what Stephanie had meant by, quote, how they lived. Dinner was a carefully orchestrated performance where Stephanie dominated the conversation with updates about her various projects. The charity luncheon she was organizing, the book club she'd started, the volunteer work that seemed to involve more networking than actual service. Michael contributed occasional nods and supportive murmurs, but Ellie noticed he rarely initiated topics or expressed opinions that differed from whatever position Stephanie had already established. When he mentioned a potential new client who might need some creative campaign work, Stephanie immediately redirected the conversation to how important it was for him to focus on premium clients rather than settling for smaller projects. "Michael's too generous with his time," Stephanie explained to Ellie as if Michael weren't sitting right there. "He'll spend hours helping some little local business that can barely afford to pay him, when he should be building relationships with corporate clients who understand the value of quality work." Ellie watched her son's face during this critique of his professional judgment. The Michael she'd raised had been confident, creative, full of ideas about how marketing could help businesses connect with their customers. This version of Michael seemed diminished somehow, like a photograph that had been left in the sun too long. "Small businesses often grow into larger ones," Ellie observed mildly. "Sometimes investing in relationships early pays dividends later." "That's very old-fashioned thinking," Stephanie replied with a patronizing smile. "The modern economy rewards strategic positioning. You can't build wealth by being sentimental about every struggling entrepreneur who walks through your door." The dismissal was polite, but absolute. delivered with the confidence of someone who believed her perspective was obviously superior. Ellie recognized the technique. Establish yourself as the authority. Frame disagreement as outdated thinking. Make the other person feel foolish for even raising an alternative viewpoint. Later that night, as Ellie unpacked her belongings in the guest room, she reflected on the dynamics she'd observed during her first evening in their home. Stephanie's control was subtle but pervasive, extending from major decisions about Michael's career down to the topics deemed acceptable for dinner conversation. Through the walls, she could hear their voices carrying from the master bedroom. Stephanie's tone was animated, clearly processing the day's events, while Michael's responses came in the form of quiet murmurs and occasional one-word agreements. "I just think 6 weeks is optimistic," she heard Stephanie say clearly. "These restoration projects always take longer than they estimate. And with Eleanor's age, she might need help with things she's not admitting." Ellie's hands stilled on the sweater she'd been folding. She moved closer to the shared wall, not quite eavesdropping, but unable to avoid hearing the conversation that was apparently about her future. "We need to be realistic about what this means for our routine," Stephanie continued. "I can't have constant disruption during the busiest season for my committee work. And you know how important it is for us to maintain our social calendar right now, especially with the Hendersons' anniversary party coming up." Michael's response was too quiet to distinguish, but Stephanie's reply came through clearly. "I'm not being selfish, I'm being practical. We have our own lives to consider, and we can't let family obligations derail everything we've worked to build here." The phrase family obligations hit Ellie like a slap. She'd spent 40 years helping other people navigate financial crises, often working weekends and evenings to ensure loan applications were processed quickly during emergency situations. She'd never considered her family relationships to be obligations. They were the foundation that made everything else meaningful. But as she listened to Stephanie discuss her presence as if it were a temporary inconvenience to be managed, rather than an opportunity to help someone she supposedly cared about, Ellie began to understand that she was dealing with a very different kind of person than she'd realized. The next morning brought the first test of Stephanie's guidelines. Ellie had always been an early riser, a habit developed during decades of opening the bank before regular business hours to accommodate commercial clients who needed to handle financial business before their own workdays began. At 6:30 a.m., she made her way to the kitchen, moving quietly to avoid disturbing anyone. The kitchen was a showcase of high-end appliances and designer finishes, the kind of space that appeared in home renovation shows. Ellie located the coffee maker and began preparing a pot, enjoying the familiar ritual of measuring grounds and water. "Oh." Stephanie's voice behind her carried surprise with an undertone of irritation. "You're up early." Ellie turned to find Stephanie in the doorway, her hair perfect despite the early hour, wearing exercise clothes that probably cost more than most people's monthly grocery budget. "I hope I didn't wake you. I tried to be quiet. I was getting ready for my workout class anyway." Stephanie moved toward the coffee maker with the territorial efficiency of someone reclaiming their space. "I usually handle the morning routine. We have a specific system that works for our schedule." The implication was clear. Ellie's presence was disrupting their carefully managed household rhythm. She stepped aside as Stephanie began preparing what appeared to be a complex breakfast, involving multiple supplements, protein powders, and organic ingredients, arranged with the precision of a laboratory experiment. "Can I help with anything?" Ellie offered. "That's sweet, but I've got it under control. Why don't you relax in your room? I'll bring you some coffee when it's ready." The dismissal was gentle, but unmistakable. Ellie found herself relegated to her guest room with a cup of coffee and the growing understanding that Stephanie's hospitality came with very specific boundaries about when and how she was allowed to exist in the common areas of the house. Over the following days, a pattern emerged. Stephanie's schedule dominated the household rhythm, and any deviation from her preferences was framed as inconsiderate disruption rather than normal family interaction. When Ellie attempted to prepare lunch for herself and Michael, she was gently redirected toward easier options that wouldn't require using Stephanie's carefully organized kitchen systems. When she offered to help with household tasks, she was told that everything was handled and that she should focus on resting and recovering from the stress of the fire. But it was the evening phone conversation that finally crystallized the true nature of her situation. Ellie had been in the guest room reading when she heard Stephanie's voice carrying from the home office, clearly engaged in what sounded like a business call. "I know, it's been challenging having her here," Stephanie was saying, her tone different from the bright politeness she used in Ellie's presence. "Don't get me wrong, she's perfectly nice, but she's just so present all the time, always wanting to help or contribute or be part of conversations." Ellie set down her book, recognizing that she was the subject of this discussion. "Exactly. That's what I told Michael. At her age, she should be grateful for a comfortable place to stay without trying to insert herself into every aspect of our lives. I mean, I get that she's bored, but that's not really our problem to solve." The casual cruelty of the words hit Ellie like a physical blow. She wasn't a beloved family member temporarily displaced by circumstances beyond her control. She was an inconvenience to be tolerated, a burden whose presence was disrupting Stephanie's preferred lifestyle. The thing is, Michael feels guilty about setting boundaries because she helped us with the mortgage application when we bought this place. But that was years ago, and we've paid every payment on time since then. It's not like we owe her indefinite gratitude. Ellie's breath caught. The mortgage application process had been more complex than Michael knew. His irregular freelance income had made him a risky candidate for a loan of that size, but Ellie had used her professional relationships and personal reputation to guarantee the application received favorable consideration. More than that, she'd provided a substantial down payment assistance that had never been formally documented, allowing them to purchase the house without depleting their savings. "I just think there's a difference between helping family and enabling dependency," Stephanie continued. "At some point, elderly parents need to understand that their adult children have their own lives and responsibilities." The phrase elderly parents, delivered with such dismissive authority, finally pushed Ellie past the point of polite tolerance. She was being discussed like a problem to be managed, rather than a person deserving basic respect and consideration. But as she sat in the guest room that felt more like temporary housing than a family sanctuary, Ellie began to remember something Stephanie had apparently forgotten. She wasn't just Michael's mother. She wasn't just a temporarily displaced homeowner in need of assistance. She was Eleanor Patterson, senior loan officer with 40 years of experience in commercial real estate financing. She understood debt structures, payment histories, and the various ways that mortgage agreements could become suddenly, catastrophically complicated for borrowers who failed to meet their obligations. And as she recalled the specific details of Michael and Stephanie's mortgage application, a slow smile spread across her face. Some lessons, she decided, were worth teaching regardless of the cost. Tomorrow, she would begin making some phone calls. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Eleanor Patterson had learned long ago that information was the most valuable currency in any negotiation. The next morning, while Stephanie attended her Pilates class and Michael worked in his upstairs office, Ellie made herself comfortable at the dining room table with her laptop and a cup of coffee that she'd deliberately prepared in Stephanie's pristine kitchen. Her first call was to Marcus Chen, her former colleague at Desert Financial Trust. Marcus had been promoted to senior vice president after Ellie's retirement, and they'd maintained a friendship built on mutual respect and shared war stories from 4 decades in commercial lending. "Ellie, what a pleasant surprise. How's retirement treating you?" "It's educational, Marcus. Actually, I'm calling with a professional question. Hypothetically speaking, what would trigger a mortgage review on a loan that's been current for 3 years? Marcus's laugh was knowing. "Hypothetically? Well, any number of things. Significant changes in income reporting, property value fluctuations, failure to maintain required insurance coverage, or," he paused meaningfully, "questions about the accuracy of information provided during the original application process. And if irregularities were discovered? Depends on the severity. Minor discrepancies might result in modified terms. Major fraud could trigger immediate acceleration of the full balance." Ellie smiled, making notes on a legal pad with the meticulous precision that had made her legendary among her colleagues. What about guarantor liability on loans where third parties provided verification or assistance? That's where things get interesting. If a guarantor becomes concerned about the borrower's ability to meet obligations, they typically have the right to request a comprehensive review, especially if their own financial exposure could be affected. After ending the call, Ellie opened her laptop and navigated to the county assessor's website. Public records were wonderfully transparent when you knew where to look and what questions to ask. Within 30 minutes, she had pulled the complete property record for Michael and Stephanie's house, including the original purchase price, current assessed value, and most importantly, the detailed mortgage information. The numbers told an interesting story. The house had been purchased for $850,000 with a down payment of $170,000. But Ellie remembered the reality behind those clean figures. Michael's bank account had contained only $45,000 at the time of closing. The additional $125,000 had come from Ellie herself, structured as a quote, family gift to avoid complicating the loan approval process. But here's what made the situation particularly fascinating. The gift documentation had been prepared by Stephanie, who had insisted on handling all the paperwork to make things easier for everyone. Ellie had signed the documents without reviewing them carefully, trusting her daughter-in-law to accurately represent the terms of the assistance. Now, with the perspective that came from feeling unwelcome in the home her money had helped purchase, Ellie decided it was time to examine exactly what she had signed. Her second call was to Patricia Reeves, her attorney and tennis partner for 15 years. Patricia specialized in real estate law and had handled Ellie's estate planning with the thoroughness that came from understanding exactly how wealthy her client had become during 4 decades of conservative investing and strategic real estate purchases. Patricia, I need you to pull some documents from your files. The gift letter and related paperwork from Michael's house purchase 3 years ago. Of course. Is everything all right? I'm conducting what you might call a comprehensive review of my recent generosity. I'll be in your office this afternoon. Patricia's office occupied the top floor of a sleek building in Scottsdale's financial district, with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the desert mountains. Ellie had always found the view calming during stressful negotiations, but today she felt energized rather than stressed. She was back in her element, analyzing documents and identifying leverage points. Here's what you signed, Patricia said, spreading the papers across her conference table. Standard gift letter acknowledging the $125,000 as an unconditional family gift with no expectation of repayment. Ellie studied the document carefully, noting Stephanie's precise handwriting in several key sections. What's interesting is what's not here, isn't it? Patricia raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? There's no mention of the verbal agreement we made at the time. The understanding that this wasn't actually a gift, but rather a private family loan with flexible repayment terms. Ellie, if you have evidence of a loan agreement rather than a gift. I have something better than evidence, Patricia. I have a daughter-in-law who's been treating me like an unwelcome charity case in the home I helped them purchase. And I have a very detailed memory of conversations that weren't accurately reflected in the paperwork she prepared. Patricia leaned back in her chair, her expression shifting to the look Ellie remembered from their most complex cases. What exactly are you thinking? I'm thinking that a woman who dismisses $125,000 in family assistance as ancient history might benefit from a reminder about the ongoing nature of certain financial relationships. Over the next hour, Patricia walked Ellie through the legal realities of their situation. The gift letter would be difficult to challenge directly, but there were other avenues available to someone with Ellie's resources and expertise. The mortgage itself contains several standard clauses that most borrowers never read carefully, Patricia explained, including provisions about maintaining accurate financial disclosures and notification requirements for significant changes in income or circumstances. And Michael's income has changed significantly since the original application. According to the tax returns you helped him prepare last year, his freelance earnings have dropped by almost 40%. That would typically trigger a requirement to notify the lender, especially on a loan of this size. Ellie felt a familiar satisfaction, the same feeling she'd experienced when identifying the weak points in a loan application, that looked solid on the surface but contained hidden vulnerabilities. What else? Property taxes have increased substantially due to neighborhood development. The escrow account is probably running short, which could trigger additional monthly payments or a lump sum requirement. And insurance? Patricia pulled out another document. Their homeowner's policy is up for renewal next month. Given the recent wildfire activity in Arizona, insurance companies are drastically increasing premiums or dropping coverage entirely for homes in certain risk zones. The pieces were falling into place with the satisfying precision of a well-executed financial strategy. Ellie had spent 40 years helping people navigate these complex requirements. But she'd also seen what happened when borrowers failed to stay on top of their obligations. Patricia, I want you to prepare a comprehensive analysis of their mortgage compliance. Everything from income reporting to insurance requirements to escrow account status. And then? Ellie smiled, the expression that had once made commercial loan applicants very nervous. Then I'm going to have a conversation with my son and daughter-in-law about the importance of maintaining accurate financial records. That evening, Ellie returned to the house on Magnolia Creek Drive with a thick folder of documents and a much clearer understanding of her position in the family's financial ecosystem. Stephanie was in the kitchen preparing what appeared to be an Instagram-worthy dinner, arranging vegetables with the artistic precision of someone who documented every meal for social media. Eleanor, how was your day? I hope you weren't too bored while we were working. The casual condescension in Stephanie's tone no longer stung. Instead, it felt like confirmation that Ellie's new strategy was entirely justified. Actually, I had quite a productive day. Catching up with old colleagues, reviewing some financial documents. You know how it is when you've worked in banking for 40 years? You never really stop thinking about risk management. Stephanie's smile faltered slightly. Risk management? Mortgage compliance, specifically. The requirements that borrowers often overlook until they become problems. Ellie settled into one of the kitchen chairs, noting how Stephanie's movements became more stiff and deliberate. Did you know that most people never read the fine print in their loan agreements? They sign dozens of pages without understanding their ongoing obligations. I'm sure Michael and I are in compliance with everything, Stephanie said, her voice carrying a defensive edge that hadn't been there moments before. I'm sure you believe that, Ellie replied pleasantly, though belief and reality don't always align when it comes to mortgage regulations. Michael appeared in the kitchen doorway, his laptop under his arm and his hair slightly mussed from running his hands through it. Hey Mom, hey babe, something smells amazing. Your mother was just telling me about mortgage compliance, Stephanie said, her tone suggesting this was an unwelcome topic of conversation. Michael's expression shifted to the polite attention he typically gave to subjects that didn't interest him. Oh yeah? Everything's still okay with our loan? That's actually what I wanted to discuss with both of you, Ellie said, opening her folder and spreading several documents across the kitchen island. I spent today reviewing the details of your mortgage, and there are some things we should probably address. Stephanie moved closer to the papers, her eyes scanning the official letterheads and legal formatting. What kind of things? Well, for starters, your income reporting. Michael, when you applied for this loan, you projected annual earnings of $180,000 based on your new freelance business. But according to your tax returns from last year, your actual income was closer to $110,000. Michael's face flushed slightly. Business has been slower than expected, but it's picking up again. I've got several new clients interested in long-term contracts. I'm sure you do, sweetheart. But from the lender's perspective, a 30% income reduction triggers certain notification requirements, especially when the borrower hasn't proactively communicated about the change. Stephanie's hands had stilled on the vegetables she'd been arranging. What kind of notification requirements? Lenders typically want to review the borrower's ability to continue meeting their obligations when income changes significantly. Sometimes that review process leads to modified terms or additional security requirements. But we've never missed a payment, Michael protested. We're completely current on everything. Being current and being compliant aren't always the same thing, Ellie explained with the patient tone she'd once used to educate borrowers about the realities of their obligations. For instance, Your escrow account is running a deficit due to increased property taxes. The lender could require you to make up the shortfall immediately rather than spreading it over 12 months. She pulled out another document. And then there's the insurance situation. Your current policy expires next month, and I'm told that your insurance company is dropping coverage for homes in this area due to wildfire risk. Finding replacement coverage could be expensive, if it's available at all. The kitchen had fallen silent except for the sound of Stephanie's knife clicking against the cutting board with increasing urgency. Michael stared at the documents spread across the counter, as if they contained some foreign language he couldn't quite translate. Mom, are you saying we're in some kind of trouble with our mortgage? I'm saying that your current situation requires careful attention to ensure continued compliance with your loan agreement. These aren't insurmountable problems, but they do need to be addressed proactively. Stephanie's voice, when she finally spoke, carried a tension that hadn't been there before. And you just happened to spend your day researching our personal financial situation? I spent my day doing what I've done for 40 years, analyzing loan compliance and risk factors. It's what I'm good at, and it's what I thought might be helpful given my temporary presence in your home. The emphasis on temporary wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Stephanie set down her knife and turned to face Ellie directly, her composure finally showing cracks. I think there might be some misunderstanding here about boundaries and privacy. I think there might be some misunderstanding about gratitude and respect, Ellie replied calmly. But fortunately, those are issues we can work through as a family. The word family hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that were just beginning to become clear. Stephanie's perfect dinner preparation had stopped entirely. Michael looked like he was processing information he'd never considered before, and Ellie felt the familiar satisfaction of a negotiation that was proceeding exactly as planned. Tomorrow, she decided, she would introduce the next phase of her strategy. Tonight, she would let them absorb the reality that their financial situation was far more complex and vulnerable than they'd realized, and that the elderly woman they'd been treating as an inconvenient houseguest had access to resources and expertise that could make their lives either much easier or considerably more complicated, depending on how they chose to proceed. The insurance cancellation notice arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by certified mail, with the kind of official urgency that made even confident homeowners nervous. Eleanor watched from the living room window as Stephanie signed for the envelope, her face cycling through confusion, concern, and finally something approaching panic as she read the contents. Michael, Stephanie's voice carried through the house with an edge that Eleanor hadn't heard before. Michael, you need to see this right now. Eleanor continued reading her book, a financial thriller that seemed almost quaint compared to the real-life drama unfolding around her. She'd spent the previous evening making strategic phone calls to contacts in the insurance industry, mentioning in casual conversation that she was concerned about wildfire risks in certain Scottsdale neighborhoods. Word traveled fast in professional networks, especially when it came from someone with Eleanor's reputation for risk assessment. Michael appeared at the top of the stairs, his hair disheveled from working at his computer. What's wrong? Sunset Mutual is canceling our homeowners insurance. They're citing increased wildfire risk and new underwriting guidelines. Stephanie's voice climbed higher with each word. The cancellation is effective in 2 weeks. Eleanor looked up from her book with an expression of mild concern. Insurance problems? That's unfortunate timing. Did you know about this? Stephanie demanded, waving the letter like evidence of a crime. Know about what, dear? This cancellation. You were just talking about insurance issues yesterday, and now this arrives today. Eleanor set down her book and regarded Stephanie with the patient attention she'd once given to loan applicants who were trying to avoid taking responsibility for their financial problems. Stephanie, insurance companies don't cancel policies based on dinner conversations. They cancel them based on actuarial data and risk assessment. Michael descended the stairs, already pulling out his phone. I'll call our agent. This has to be some kind of mistake. It's not a mistake, Eleanor said calmly. Insurance companies across Arizona are dropping coverage in high-risk areas. It's been building for months, ever since the wildfires in Paradise Valley. Your neighborhood has been reclassified as elevated risk. Stephanie stared at her with growing suspicion. How do you know so much about this? Because I spent 40 years in banking, dear. Insurance compliance is a major component of mortgage security. When borrowers can't maintain required coverage, it triggers automatic protections for the lender. The color drained from Michael's face as the implications became clear. What kind of automatic protections? Force-placed insurance, typically. The lender secures coverage to protect their investment and bills the borrower for the premium. It's usually 3 to 5 times more expensive than private coverage, and it only protects the lender's interests, not the homeowner's personal property. Eleanor delivered this information with the matter-of-fact tone she'd perfected for explaining unpleasant financial realities to borrowers who thought they understood their obligations better than they actually did. How much more expensive? Stephanie's voice had dropped to a whisper. Your current premium is about $2,400 annually, correct? Force-placed coverage for a home this size and value would likely run $8,000 to $12,000 per year, paid monthly through your mortgage servicer. Michael sank into one of the living room chairs, his phone forgotten in his hand. We can't afford an extra $800 a month on top of our mortgage payment. Then you'll need to find alternative coverage quickly, Eleanor replied. Though I should mention that most insurers are using the same risk assessment data. If Sunset Mutual has reclassified your area, others will likely follow suit. Stephanie's facade of polite hostility finally cracked completely. This is convenient timing, isn't it? You show up here, start talking about mortgage compliance, and suddenly we're facing insurance problems. Stephanie. Eleanor's voice carried a warning that made Michael look up sharply. It was the tone that had once made loan committee members reconsider questionable decisions and unruly borrowers think twice about challenging her authority. Are you suggesting that I somehow influenced a major insurance company's underwriting decisions? I'm suggesting that you seem remarkably well informed about problems we didn't even know we had until yesterday. Eleanor stood slowly, her movements deliberate and controlled. At 72, she might not have the physical presence she'd once commanded, but 40 years of handling difficult negotiations had taught her how to project authority through posture and tone. Let me be very clear about something. I spent 4 decades helping families navigate complex financial situations. I understand mortgage compliance, insurance requirements, and the various ways that seemingly stable loans can become problematic very quickly. If you're interpreting my expertise as some kind of threat, that says more about your situation than it does about my intentions. The words hung in the air with the weight of absolute conviction. Michael looked between his mother and his wife as if watching a tennis match where he didn't understand the rules, but could sense that the stakes were higher than he'd realized. Mom, he said finally, what exactly are you saying? I'm saying that knowledge is neutral, Michael. It's how people choose to use that knowledge that determines whether it becomes helpful or problematic. Eleanor's phone rang at that moment, the ringtone cutting through the tension like a blade. She glanced at the screen and smiled slightly. Excuse me, this is my contractor calling about the house repairs, she answered with professional warmth. Hello, Frank. Yes, I'm available to discuss the timeline. As she listened to the caller, her expression grew increasingly concerned. I see. No, I understand these things take time to source properly. 8 weeks instead of 6? Well, if that's what's required for proper restoration. Stephanie's eyes widened with something approaching desperation. 2 more weeks of Eleanor's presence in their home, with financial problems mounting, and the uncomfortable awareness that their houseguest possessed dangerous expertise. Actually, Frank, Eleanor continued, I want to discuss expanding the scope of the work. My insurance adjuster mentioned some additional issues that should be addressed while we have contractors on site. She paused, listening. 12 weeks total? Let me think about that and call you back. She ended the call and found both Michael and Stephanie staring at her with expressions that mixed hope and horror. The repairs are taking longer than expected, she announced matter-of-factly. They've discovered some electrical issues that need to be addressed for safety compliance. It looks like I'll be staying here through Christmas. Christmas? Stephanie's voice cracked slightly. That's 4 months away. I'm sure we can make it work, Eleanor replied pleasantly. We're family, after all. Though I suppose we should discuss some household arrangements. since this will be a longer stay than originally planned. Michael leaned forward, clearly grasping for some element of the situation he could control. What kind of arrangements? Well, I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday regarding mortgage compliance. Given that I'll be here for an extended period, it might make sense for me to take a more active role in helping you navigate these insurance and escrow issues. Stephanie's laugh was sharp and bitter. More active how? I have relationships throughout the Arizona banking and insurance industries. I could make some calls, perhaps find solutions that aren't available to the general public. Eleanor paused, letting the offer settle before adding the crucial caveat. Of course, that kind of assistance typically requires a certain level of mutual respect and appreciation. The meaning was crystal clear to everyone in the room. Eleanor was offering to use her professional connections to solve their mounting financial problems, but only if they adjusted their treatment of her. "You're blackmailing us," Stephanie said flatly. "I'm offering to help," Eleanor corrected gently. "But help requires cooperation. If you prefer to handle these issues independently, I completely understand. I'll simply focus on my own recovery and try to stay out of your way." The phrase, "stay out of your way," carried particular weight, a direct reference to Stephanie's earlier comment about Eleanor being in the way. But now the context had shifted dramatically. Being in the way of someone with Eleanor's expertise and connections was a very different kind of problem than they'd originally anticipated. Michael's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at the screen and his face went pale. The insurance agent called back. "He says he can't find any companies willing to write new policies in our zip code. Everything's been suspended pending new risk assessments." "How long for the risk assessments?" Eleanor asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. 6 to 8 months, minimum. The silence that followed was deafening. Stephanie sank into a chair, her perfect posture finally cracking under the weight of their financial reality. Michael stared at his phone as if it might suddenly deliver better news. Eleanor settled back into her own chair and reopened her book. "Well, I suppose that gives us plenty of time to work together on solutions. I'll make some calls tomorrow and see what options might be available through my industry contacts." "And what would you want in return?" Stephanie asked, her voice barely audible. Eleanor looked up from her book with genuine surprise. "Want in return?" "Stephanie, I'm offering to help my family during a difficult time. The only thing I want is to be treated like a valued member of this household, rather than an inconvenient burden." The words were delivered with perfect sincerity, but the underlying message was unmistakable. Eleanor had just demonstrated that she possessed the power to either solve their problems or make them significantly worse. The choice of which path they took would depend entirely on how they chose to treat her going forward. "I think," Michael said slowly, "we should talk about how to make your extended stay more comfortable for everyone." Eleanor smiled, the expression warm and genuine for the first time since arriving at their house. "I think that's a wonderful idea, sweetheart. Why don't we start with dinner arrangements? I'd love to contribute to the household routine instead of feeling like I'm disrupting it." As the afternoon sun slanted through the living room windows, the power dynamic in the Scottsdale house had shifted completely. Stephanie's carefully controlled environment was crumbling under financial pressure. She couldn't navigate alone. Michael was beginning to understand the true complexity of his mortgage obligations, and Eleanor had established herself not as a temporary inconvenience, but as an essential ally, whose expertise they desperately needed. The question now wasn't whether Eleanor would stay through Christmas. The question was whether Stephanie would swallow her pride quickly enough to avoid losing everything they'd worked to build. And Eleanor, settling comfortably into her chair with her book and her newfound leverage, was prepared to wait as long as necessary for that particular lesson to be learned. The call from Desert Financial Trust came at 9:47 a.m. on a Thursday morning, delivered with the bureaucratic precision that Eleanor remembered from her own days of conveying unwelcome news to borrowers. She watched from the kitchen window as Michael answered his phone in the backyard, his body language shifting from casual confidence to rigid attention within seconds. "Mr. Bradley, this is Janet Rodriguez from Desert Financial Trust's Loan Servicing Department. We need to schedule an appointment to discuss some compliance issues with your mortgage account." Eleanor could hear the conversation clearly through the open patio door, and she noted with professional interest how Michael's voice climbed higher with each response. Compliance issues? But we're current on all our payments. We've never been late, not even once. This isn't about payment history, Mr. Bradley. We've received notification that your property insurance has been canceled, and we haven't received documentation of replacement coverage. Additionally, our records show significant changes in your reported income that require review. Michael glanced toward the house, his eyes finding Eleanor through the window. She offered him an encouraging smile while making mental notes about the bank's timing. It was remarkably efficient, almost as if someone with inside knowledge had ensured their case received priority attention. How much time do we have to resolve these issues? You have 14 days to provide proof of adequate insurance coverage or will be forced to implement force-placed insurance. The income verification review will require updated financial documentation going back 18 months. After Michael ended the call, he stood in the backyard for several minutes, staring at his phone as if it might ring again with better news. Eleanor used the time to prepare a fresh pot of coffee and arrange some pastries on a plate. Crisis management, she'd learned, was always more effective when combined with comfort food. That didn't sound like good news, she said gently when Michael finally came inside. The bank wants to meet with us about compliance issues. They know about the insurance cancellation, and they want to review our finances because of changes in my income. Michael slumped into a kitchen chair, looking older than his 45 years. Mom, how did they find out about everything so quickly? Eleanor poured coffee into 2 mugs, considering her response carefully. The truth was that she'd made a single phone call to Marcus Chen, mentioning in passing that she was concerned about her son's financial stability during these challenging economic times. Marcus had apparently taken that concern very seriously. Banks have sophisticated monitoring systems, sweetheart. When insurance companies update their risk assessments, that information gets shared with mortgage holders automatically. It's all connected. But the timing seems so coincidental. Everything was fine until what? Michael looked at her with a mixture of gratitude and growing understanding. Until you started explaining things we should have been paying attention to all along. Stephanie appeared in the kitchen doorway, her usual morning workout glow replaced by the pale tension of someone who'd been awake most of the night. Was that the bank? They want to meet with us, insurance and income verification issues. When? Next Tuesday, 10 a.m. Stephanie sank into the remaining kitchen chair, her perfect posture finally abandoning her completely. We're going to lose the house, aren't we? The question hung in the air with the weight of absolute fear. Eleanor recognized the moment from countless similar conversations during her banking career. The instant when borrowers moved from denial to panic, skipping entirely over the logical problem-solving phase that might actually help them. That depends, Eleanor said calmly, on how you choose to handle the next 2 weeks. Handle it how? Stephanie's voice carried desperation that was painful to hear. We can't afford force-placed insurance. We can't prove income that doesn't exist. And we can't find replacement coverage that the bank will accept. Eleanor settled into her chair and regarded both of them with the patient attention of a teacher preparing to deliver a crucial lesson. Those are all problems that can be solved, but not by panicking and not by pretending they'll resolve themselves. You said you could help, Michael said quietly. What exactly did you mean? I meant that I have relationships and expertise that could be valuable in navigating this situation. But help requires trust, and trust requires honesty about what's really happening here. Stephanie's eyes sharpened with something approaching hostility. What do you mean? What's really happening? I mean that your financial problems didn't start with the insurance cancellation, Stephanie. They started with decisions you've been making for years about lifestyle, spending, and priorities. Eleanor pulled out a folder she'd prepared the night before, spreading several documents across the kitchen table. Your mortgage payment is $4,200 monthly. Your property taxes have increased to $1,800 monthly. Your current insurance was $200 monthly, and force-placed coverage will be $800 to $1,000 monthly. She pointed to each calculation as she spoke, her tone carrying the authority of someone who'd done this analysis thousands of times before. That's $6,800 to $7,000 in monthly housing costs alone. Michael's current income averages $9,200 monthly after taxes, which leaves you $2,200 to $2,400 for everything else. Michael stared at the numbers with growing horror. I didn't realize it was that tight. It gets tighter, Eleanor continued relentlessly. Your credit card statements show monthly minimums of $850. Car payments total $920. Utilities, phones, and subscriptions add another $400. That's $2,170 in fixed expenses beyond housing costs. Stephanie's face had gone completely white. You went through our credit card statements. Stephanie, you left them on the counter next to the mail. I couldn't help but notice when the numbers didn't match the lifestyle I was observing. Eleanor's tone remained calm and professional, but her words carried the impact of surgical precision. You're spending $30 monthly on 17 different subscription services. Your grocery bills average $800 monthly for 2 people. Your restaurant and entertainment expenses are running $600 monthly. We have to eat, Stephanie protested weakly. Of course you do. But you don't have to eat $40 steaks 3 nights a week while claiming you can't afford insurance payments. The criticism was delivered without malice, but its accuracy made it devastating. Michael was staring at the spreadsheet Eleanor had prepared, seeing their financial reality laid out with merciless clarity for the first time. Mom, how long have you known about this? I suspected from the first week I was here, sweetheart. When someone complains about financial stress while living in obvious luxury, it usually means they're prioritizing the wrong things. Eleanor gathered the papers and placed them back in the folder. The good news is that these are all choices, which means they can be changed. The question is whether you're willing to make the changes necessary to keep your home. What kind of changes? Michael asked. The kind that require admitting that your current lifestyle is unsustainable, and that my presence here might be an asset rather than an inconvenience. Stephanie finally looked up from the table, her eyes red-rimmed but focused. What exactly are you proposing? Eleanor smiled, the expression carrying genuine warmth for the first time since arriving at their house. I'm proposing a partnership. You need expertise in mortgage compliance, insurance negotiations, and financial restructuring. I have 40 years of experience in all 3 areas. And what would you want in return? I want to be treated like a valued member of this family rather than a temporary burden. I want my opinions respected and my suggestions considered seriously. And I want some changes in how this household operates. Michael leaned forward, clearly grasping for hope. What kind of changes? Practical ones? I'll take over meal planning and grocery shopping, which will cut your food costs by at least 60%. I'll handle negotiations with the bank and insurance companies, using my professional relationships to find solutions you can't access on your own. Eleanor paused, letting the offer settle before continuing. I'll also contribute $2,000 monthly toward household expenses for as long as I'm staying here, which should provide the breathing room you need to restructure your other obligations. The silence that followed was profound. Stephanie stared at Eleanor as if seeing her clearly for the first time, while Michael's expression cycled through amazement, relief, and something approaching shame. "You do that?" he asked quietly. "After how we've treated you?" "Michael, you're my son. Stephanie, you're part of my family whether we like each other or not. Families help each other through difficult times, but help requires mutual respect." Stephanie's voice, when she finally spoke, was barely above a whisper. "I owe you an apology. You owe me respect going forward. The apology is less important than the behavior change." Eleanor stood and moved to the coffee maker, giving them space to process what had just happened. She'd spent 2 weeks demonstrating the consequences of treating her dismissively, and now she was offering them a path forward that would solve their immediate problems while establishing her rightful place in their household. "There is one more thing," she said, turning back to face them. "The meeting with the bank on Tuesday. I'll be going with you." "You will?" Michael's relief was palpable. "I will. Janet Rodriguez and I have known each other for 15 years. She'll listen to me in ways she won't listen to you, And I know exactly what documentation and commitments will satisfy their compliance requirements. Stephanie looked up from the table, her perfect composure finally cracking to reveal something that might have been genuine gratitude. Eleanor, I don't know what to say. Say that you understand the partnership I'm offering, and that you're prepared to honor it. I understand. And yes, I'm prepared to honor it. Eleanor nodded, satisfied with what she heard in Stephanie's voice. The desperation was still there, but it had been joined by recognition and respect. Good. Then let's start planning how to save your house. As the three of them sat around the kitchen table, Eleanor began sketching out a comprehensive strategy for the bank meeting. For the first time since arriving at their home, she felt like she was exactly where she belonged, not as a tolerated burden, but as the financial expert whose knowledge and connections would determine whether they kept their home or lost everything they'd worked to build. The revolution was complete. Now the real work could begin. Yeninishilet Hasses. The Desert Financial Trust building rose 32 stories into the Phoenix skyline, its glass facade reflecting the morning sun like a beacon of financial authority. Eleanor Patterson had walked through those revolving doors thousands of times during her career, but never with quite the same sense of anticipation she felt on this Tuesday morning. She sat in the passenger seat of Michael's BMW, watching him grip the steering wheel with white knuckles as they pulled into the executive parking garage. In the back seat, Stephanie clutched a leather portfolio containing the financial documents Eleanor had spent the weekend helping them organize. Remember? Eleanor said as Michael turned off the engine. Let me do most of the talking during the initial discussion. Janet Rodriguez respects directness, but she also appreciates when borrowers come prepared with solutions rather than excuses. What if she asks questions we can't answer? Stephanie's voice carried the tension of someone who'd spent 3 sleepless nights imagining worst-case scenarios. Then we'll tell her we need time to research the answer and get back to her. The worst thing you can do in a bank meeting is guess or make commitments you can't keep. Eleanor had spent 40 years preparing borrowers for exactly this type of conversation, but she'd never had quite so much personal investment in the outcome. This wasn't just about helping strangers navigate financial difficulties. This was about demonstrating to her family that her expertise had real value, that her presence in their lives was an asset rather than a burden. The elevator ride to the 28th floor passed in silence, each of them lost in their own thoughts about the next hour would bring. Eleanor found herself remembering her first day at Desert Financial Trust 43 years ago, when she'd been a young loan officer trying to prove herself in a male-dominated industry. She'd learned early that respect had to be earned through competence and consistency, not demanded through position or relationship. Today, she was about to demonstrate just how much competence she'd accumulated over the decades. Janet Rodriguez's office overlooked the Salt River Valley, with floor-to-ceiling windows that provided a panoramic view of the desert mountains. She was younger than Eleanor by 15 years, but her reputation for thoroughness and fair dealing had made her one of the most respected loan officers in Arizona's banking community. Eleanor Patterson, Janet smiled warmly as they entered her office. I should have known you'd be involved when I saw the Bradley file. How long has it been? Too long, Janet. Though I have to say, retirement is treating me well. I can see that. You look wonderful. Janet's attention shifted to Michael and Stephanie, with the professional courtesy that came from years of handling sensitive financial conversations. Mr. and Mrs. Bradley, please have a seat. I appreciate you coming in to discuss these compliance issues. Eleanor had positioned herself strategically, sitting between Michael and Janet's desk in a way that suggested she was both advocate and advisor, rather than mere observer. It was a subtle signal that Janet would understand immediately. Janet, before we begin, I want to clarify my role in today's meeting. Michael and Stephanie have asked me to serve as their financial consultant during this review process. I've spent the past week analyzing their situation and developing some strategies that I think will address your concerns. Janet's eyebrows rose slightly. Eleanor Patterson didn't come out of retirement to handle routine mortgage problems. If she was involved, it meant the situation was either more complex or more important than the file indicated. Of course. Why don't you walk me through what you've discovered? Eleanor opened her own portfolio, revealing documents that were organized with the precision that had made her legendary among her colleagues. The immediate issue is the insurance cancellation, but that's really a symptom of broader challenges that Michael and Stephanie have been facing. She pulled out the first set of papers. As you can see from these income statements, Michael's freelance consulting business has experienced some volatility over the past 18 months. The original loan application projected annual earnings of $180,000, but actual income has averaged closer to $132,000. Janet reviewed the documents with the careful attention Eleanor remembered from their previous professional interactions. That's a significant variance. It is. However, the income reduction was primarily due to Michael focusing on higher value, longer-term contracts, rather than taking every project that came available. The strategy has been successful. He's now secured 3 multi-year agreements that will stabilize his earnings going forward. Eleanor had spent Sunday afternoon helping Michael restructure his client relationships, consolidating several smaller projects into more substantial commitments. It had required some creative negotiation and a few strategic concessions, but the result was a much more stable income projection. What kind of stabilization are we looking at? Michael cleared his throat, his confidence growing as he followed Eleanor's coaching. My contracts for the next 2 years total $364,000, which works out to $182,000 annually. That's actually higher than my original projections. And these contracts are signed and executed? Yes, ma'am. The documents are in your folder. Janet reviewed the contracts with obvious surprise. Most borrowers facing compliance reviews came with excuses and promises. The Bradley family had arrived with solutions and documentation. That addresses the income verification concern. What about the insurance situation? This was where Eleanor's expertise became truly valuable. She'd spent Monday morning making calls to contacts throughout Arizona's insurance industry, leveraging relationships built over decades of commercial lending. The wildfire risk reclassification has affected hundreds of properties in this area, Eleanor explained. Standard homeowners policies are largely unavailable, but there are specialized carriers who write coverage for properties that meet certain risk mitigation standards. She pulled out another set of documents. Stephanie and Michael have agreed to implement a comprehensive fire prevention plan that includes defensible space landscaping, ember-resistant building modifications, and upgraded fire suppression systems. Stephanie leaned forward, her voice steady for the first time since entering the building. We've already received estimates for the work, and we're prepared to begin implementation immediately. The specialized carrier is Wildfire Protection Insurance Group. They're owned by a consortium of banks and specifically designed to provide coverage for properties that traditional insurers won't touch. The premium is higher than standard coverage, but it's significantly less expensive than force-placed insurance. Janet was making notes as Eleanor spoke, clearly impressed by the thoroughness of their preparation. What kind of premium are we talking about? $4,800 annually, compared to the $9,600 your force-placed coverage would cost. More importantly, it provides comprehensive protection rather than just covering the lender's interests. And WPIG is willing to write this coverage? Eleanor smiled, the expression carrying just a hint of the connections she'd cultivated over 4 decades in Arizona banking. I spoke with their underwriting director yesterday. They're prepared to issue a binder immediately upon completion of a property inspection, which we've scheduled for Thursday. The meeting continued for another hour, with Eleanor methodically addressing every concern Janet raised about the loan's compliance status. She presented documentation for the property improvements, detailed budgets for the fire prevention measures, and a comprehensive financial plan that demonstrated how Michael and Stephanie would manage their obligations going forward. But it was the final element of their presentation that truly demonstrated Eleanor's strategic thinking. Janet, there's one more thing we should discuss. The original loan application included a gift letter for down payment assistance provided by family members. Given the current challenges, that family support is being expanded. Eleanor pulled out a document she'd had Patricia Reeves prepare over the weekend. I'm providing a formal guarantee for this mortgage, backed by assets held at this institution. The guarantee covers not just the current compliance issues, but any future payment difficulties that might arise. Janet's expression shifted to something approaching amazement. Eleanor, are you saying you're personally guaranteeing your son's mortgage? I'm saying that this family's financial stability is important to me, and I'm prepared to use my resources to ensure it. The guarantee is secured by certificates of deposit totaling $1.2 million, which I'm transferring to Desert Financial Trust specifically for this purpose. The silence that followed was profound. Michael stared at his mother with an expression that mixed gratitude, amazement, and something approaching awe. Stephanie's eyes had filled with tears that she was trying unsuccessfully to hide. Janet leaned back in her chair, clearly processing the implications of what Eleanor had just offered. A guarantee backed by $1.2 million in liquid assets didn't just solve the Bradley family's immediate compliance issues. It made their loan one of the most secure mortgages in the bank's entire portfolio. Eleanor, that's an extraordinarily generous gesture. It's an investment in my family's future. And frankly, Janet, it's an investment in a relationship with borrowers who've learned valuable lessons about financial management, and who now have the expertise to ensure those lessons are never forgotten. As they prepared to leave Janet's office an hour later, the transformation in Michael and Stephanie's demeanor was remarkable. They'd entered the building as desperate borrowers facing potential foreclosure. They were leaving as valued clients with a personally guaranteed mortgage and a comprehensive plan for long-term financial stability. But Eleanor's most significant victory wasn't the successful bank meeting. It was the conversation that took place in the elevator as they descended from the 28th floor. "Mom," Michael said quietly, "I don't know how to thank you for what you just did." "You don't need to thank me, sweetheart. You need to understand that this is what family looks like when it functions properly." Stephanie wiped her eyes with a tissue, her voice thick with emotion. "Eleanor, I've been horrible to you. I've treated you like you were a burden when you were actually trying to help us all along." "Stephanie, you weren't horrible. You were scared and overwhelmed and trying to control a situation that felt out of control. I understand that because I've seen it hundreds of times during my career." Eleanor placed a gentle hand on Stephanie's shoulder. "The difference is that now you know you don't have to face these challenges alone. You have someone in your corner who understands how the system works and who's invested in your success." As they walked through the parking garage toward Michael's car, Eleanor reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. 3 weeks ago, she'd been a displaced homeowner seeking temporary shelter from family members who saw her as an inconvenience. Today, she was a valued advisor who'd just used her expertise and resources to secure their financial future. But more importantly, she demonstrated something that Stephanie had apparently never understood: that age and experience weren't liabilities to be managed, but assets to be respected and leveraged. The drive home was different from the tense silence of their trip to the bank. Michael and Stephanie were animated, discussing the fire prevention improvements and the timeline for implementing their new financial plan. Eleanor listened with satisfaction, recognizing that they'd finally begun to see their situation as manageable rather than catastrophic. "There is one thing we need to discuss," Eleanor said as they pulled into their driveway. "Now that we've solved the immediate crisis, we need to talk about long-term arrangements." Stephanie turned in her seat, her expression suddenly worried. "What kind of arrangements?" "Well, my house repairs are going to take another 8 weeks, but after that, I have some decisions to make about where I want to live." Michael's voice carried a note of panic. "Mom, you're not thinking about moving away, are you?" Eleanor smiled, the expression carrying genuine warmth and just a hint of mischief. "Actually, I'm thinking about moving closer. Much closer." "What do you mean?" "I mean that this house has plenty of space. You clearly benefit from having someone with financial expertise as part of the household, and I've discovered that I rather enjoy being an active part of my family's daily life." The silence that followed was profound, but it carried hope rather than tension. "Eleanor," Stephanie said carefully, "are you asking to move in with us permanently?" "I'm asking whether you'd like me to consider it. It would be a partnership arrangement, of course. I'd contribute to household expenses, handle the financial management, and provide the kind of stability that comes from having someone with my background as part of the family structure." Michael's grin was the first genuinely happy expression Eleanor had seen from him since arriving at their house. "Mom, I'd love that. I really would." Stephanie was quiet for a longer moment, clearly processing the implications of Eleanor's offer. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a sincerity that Eleanor had never heard before. "I'd like that too. I'd like it very much." As they sat in the driveway of the house that Eleanor's expertise had just saved from foreclosure, the three of them began to discuss the practical arrangements for a living situation that would benefit everyone involved. Eleanor would have a permanent home with family who'd learned to value her contributions. Michael and Stephanie would have financial security, and the peace of mind that came from knowing someone with Eleanor's expertise was always available to help navigate future challenges. It was, Eleanor reflected, exactly the kind of outcome that became possible when people finally understood that wisdom and experience were gifts to be treasured, rather than burdens to be tolerated. The mortgage crisis was over. The family partnership was just beginning. 6 weeks after the bank meeting that changed everything, Eleanor Patterson stood in what had once been Stephanie's pristine home office, now transformed into a comprehensive command center for the Bradley family's financial empire. 3 computer monitors displayed real-time market data, mortgage payment schedules, and investment portfolios. The walls were lined with filing cabinets containing meticulously organized records of every aspect of their newly restructured financial life. But the most significant transformation wasn't visible in the technology or organization. It was evident in the way Stephanie knocked respectfully on the doorframe before entering, carrying a cup of coffee prepared exactly the way Eleanor preferred it. "Good morning, Eleanor. How did the overnight markets treat our investments?" Eleanor looked up from the portfolio analysis she'd been preparing, noting with satisfaction how naturally Stephanie now used the word "our" when discussing family finances. "The European markets are showing some volatility, but our positions are performing exactly as projected. Your understanding of international diversification is improving remarkably." It was true. Over the past month and a half, Eleanor had been teaching Stephanie the fundamentals of investment management, estate planning, and long-term wealth building. What had started as necessary education to prevent future financial crises had evolved into something approaching genuine mentorship. "I have the quarterly budget review ready for your approval," Stephanie continued, placing a bound folder on Eleanor's desk. "We're running 8% under projected expenses for the 3rd consecutive month." Eleanor opened the folder, scanning the detailed spreadsheets with the practiced eye of someone who'd reviewed thousands of financial documents during her career. Stephanie's attention to detail was impressive, but more importantly, her priorities had fundamentally shifted. Gone were the $800 monthly grocery bills for 2 people. Gone were the 17 subscription services that no one actually used. Gone were the casual $40 dinners at restaurants that added up to more than most families spent on rent. In their place was a carefully planned financial structure that prioritized long-term security over short-term indulgence. Stephanie had embraced the discipline of living within their means, not as deprivation, but as empowerment. "The fire prevention improvements are ahead of schedule and under budget," Stephanie reported with obvious pride. "The contractor says we'll qualify for the maximum insurance discount once the final inspection is completed next week." Excellent. "And Michael's client situation?" 3 new prospects from referrals, all seeking multi-year contracts. "He's finally understanding that sustainable income is more valuable than quick projects." Eleanor closed the folder and leaned back in her chair, studying Stephanie's face. The woman who'd once dismissed her as a burden now sought her approval with the eagerness of a student who'd discovered the value of expertise. But more importantly, Stephanie had begun to understand that financial security wasn't about maintaining appearances. It was about making smart decisions consistently over time. "Stephanie, sit down for a moment. There's something we need to discuss." A flicker of concern crossed Stephanie's face as she settled into the chair across from Eleanor's desk. Despite their improved relationship, she still carried traces of the anxiety that came from having learned just how quickly financial stability could disappear. "Is everything all right? Have I made a mistake somewhere?" "Nothing's wrong. In fact, everything is remarkably right. That's what I want to talk about." Eleanor pulled out a different folder, this one containing documents that Stephanie hadn't seen before. "When I guaranteed your mortgage 6 weeks ago, I told Janet Rodriguez that I was making an investment in the family's future. Today I want to discuss exactly what that means." Stephanie's attention sharpened with the focus Eleanor had come to appreciate during their daily financial planning sessions. "I've been watching how you've handled the changes we've implemented, the budget discipline, the investment education, the way you've embraced long-term thinking over short-term gratification. You've demonstrated something that can't be taught, genuine commitment to financial responsibility." Eleanor opened the folder, revealing documents that made Stephanie's eyes widen with surprise. "These are the papers establishing the Bradley Family Trust. I've been working with Patricia Reeves to create a structure that will protect your financial future while ensuring that the lessons you've learned are never forgotten. A family trust? A comprehensive wealth management structure that includes the house, investment accounts, and provisions for future generations. Michael and I have already signed the documents. The trust requires your signature to become active. Stephanie stared at the papers as if they contained some language she couldn't quite translate. Eleanor, I don't understand. Why would you do this? Because you've proven that you understand the difference between managing money and building wealth. Because you've shown that you can prioritize family security over personal indulgence. And because I want to ensure that these lessons benefit not just you and Michael, but any children you might have in the future. The mention of children brought tears to Stephanie's eyes. It was a topic they'd discussed carefully over the past month, acknowledging that their previous financial chaos had made starting a family seem impossible. There's more, Eleanor continued. The trust includes provisions for expanding this house to accommodate multiple generations. I've had architects draw up plans for a separate wing that would give us privacy while maintaining our family connection. She pulled out architectural drawings that showed a beautifully designed addition, complete with Eleanor's own master suite, sitting room, and private entrance. It was a vision of multi-generational living that respected everyone's independence while celebrating their interdependence. You've thought of everything, Stephanie whispered. I've planned for everything, but plans only work when everyone involved is committed to making them succeed. Eleanor leaned forward, her expression carrying the intensity that had once made loan applicants pay very careful attention to her words. Stephanie, 6 weeks ago you saw me as an obstacle to your preferred lifestyle. Today I'm offering to make you a partner in building something far more valuable than any lifestyle could provide. I'm offering you security, wisdom, and the kind of wealth that lasts for generations. What would you need from me? Continued commitment to the principles we've established. Respect for the expertise I bring to our family's financial management. And honest communication about challenges before they become crises. Stephanie was quiet for several minutes, reading through the trust documents with the careful attention Eleanor had taught her to apply to all financial matters. When she finally looked up, her expression carried a maturity that hadn't been there when Eleanor first arrived at their house. Eleanor, I need to tell you something. When you first came to stay with us, I was terrified that you'd see through all the pretense I'd built around our lives. I was afraid you'd figure out that we were struggling, that my perfect housewife act was hiding the fact that I had no idea how to actually manage our finances. Her voice grew stronger as she continued. I treated you badly because I was scared you'd expose me as a fraud. But you weren't here to expose anything. You were here to teach us how to actually be the successful family I was pretending we already were. Eleanor felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with financial planning or mortgage guarantees. This was the conversation she'd been hoping for since that first morning when Stephanie had dismissed her offers to help. Stephanie, everyone struggles with financial management. The difference between successful families and struggling ones isn't that successful families don't have problems. It's that they face their problems honestly and learn from people who have more experience. I want to sign the trust documents. But more than that, I want to ask you something. What's that? Would you teach me everything? Not just about budgeting and investments, but about the kind of thinking that builds real wealth? I want to understand what you understand. Eleanor smiled, the expression carrying 4 decades of satisfaction from helping people master complex financial concepts. Stephanie, nothing would make me happier. The afternoon brought a celebration that would have been unimaginable 2 months earlier. Michael arrived home from a successful client meeting to find Eleanor and Stephanie in the kitchen, working together to prepare a dinner that combined Eleanor's traditional recipes with Stephanie's attention to presentation. But more importantly, he found them talking and laughing together like partners rather than adversaries. Something smells incredible in here, he announced, kissing Stephanie and hugging Eleanor with equal warmth. We're celebrating, Stephanie said, her face glowing with excitement. Eleanor has set up a family trust that's going to change everything for us. What kind of trust? Eleanor wiped her hands on a dish towel and turned to face her son with an expression of profound satisfaction. The kind that ensures our family's financial security for generations, sweetheart. The kind that means you'll never have to worry about mortgage compliance or insurance crises or any of the problems that nearly cost you your home. She pulled out the architectural drawings and spread them across the kitchen island. It also means we can start planning for the family expansion you and Stephanie have been discussing. Michael's eyes widened as he studied the plans for the house addition. Mom, this is incredible, but it must cost a fortune. Michael, when you've spent 40 years helping other people build wealth, you accumulate the resources to invest in your own family's future. This isn't an expense. It's the best investment I could possibly make. Eleanor moved to the stove, stirring the sauce for what would be their first dinner as official partners in the Bradley Family Trust. Besides, I've discovered something important during my time here. Retirement isn't about withdrawing from life. It's about applying everything you've learned to the people and projects that matter most. As they sat down to dinner that evening, the conversation flowed with an ease that reflected their transformed relationships. Michael talked about his expanding client base and the confidence that came from having financial security. Stephanie discussed her investment education and the excitement of understanding concepts that had once seemed impossibly complex. But Eleanor found herself most interested in their plans for the future, children they wanted to have, travel they wanted to pursue, and the sense of possibility that came from having a solid financial foundation. There's one more thing we should discuss, Eleanor said as they finished dessert. The mortgage guarantee I provided comes with certain privileges. What kind of privileges? Michael asked. Eleanor smiled, the expression carrying just a hint of the strategic thinking that had gotten them to this point. Well, as the guarantor of your mortgage, I have the right to approve any major financial decisions you make. That includes things like refinancing, home equity loans, or significant changes to your investment strategy. Stephanie's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Are you saying you have veto power over our financial decisions? I'm saying I have the authority to ensure that the hard lessons you've learned aren't forgotten when things get comfortable again. The silence that followed wasn't tense, but thoughtful. Both Michael and Stephanie were processing the implications of Eleanor's continued oversight of their financial lives. Actually, Stephanie said slowly, I think that's exactly what we need. Someone with your experience keeping us accountable for the decisions we make. Michael nodded in agreement. Mom, if the past 6 weeks have taught me anything, it's that I don't want to go back to the way we were living before. If your oversight helps ensure we stay on track, I'm grateful for it. Eleanor felt a deep satisfaction that went beyond successful financial planning. She'd not only solved their immediate crisis and secured their long-term future, she'd helped them understand that true financial security came from discipline, education, and the wisdom to seek guidance from people who'd already navigated similar challenges. In that case, she said, raising her wine glass in a toast, here's to the Bradley Family Trust, to partnerships that make everyone stronger, and to the discovery that sometimes the best investments are the ones we make in each other. As they clinked glasses around the dinner table, Eleanor reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought them to this moment. 3 months ago, she'd been a displaced homeowner, seeking temporary shelter from family members who saw her as an inconvenience. Tonight, she was the architect of a multi-generational wealth-building strategy that would benefit her family for decades to come. But more importantly, she demonstrated something that Stephanie had never understood. That age and experience weren't burdens to be tolerated, but assets to be treasured and leveraged for everyone's benefit. The woman who'd once told her she was in the way was now eager to learn everything Eleanor could teach her about building lasting financial security. The son who'd felt trapped between his mother and his wife now had a united family working toward shared goals. And Eleanor herself had discovered that retirement didn't have to mean withdrawal from meaningful work. It could mean applying 4 decades of expertise to the most important project of all, ensuring that her family would never again face the kind of financial crisis that had nearly cost them everything. The transformation was complete. The real legacy was just beginning. 3 months after signing the Bradley Family Trust documents, Eleanor Patterson discovered that their financial transformation had attracted attention from unexpected quarters. The call came on a Thursday afternoon while she was reviewing investment statements in her home office, now officially established as the family's financial nerve center. Mrs. Patterson? This is David Chen from Arizona Wealth Management. I hope you don't mind the unsolicited call. But your reputation in the banking community precedes you, and I have a proposition that might interest you. Eleanor set aside the portfolio analysis she'd been preparing and gave David her full attention. In 40 years of banking, she'd learned that unsolicited calls from financial professionals usually meant either trouble or opportunity. Given their current circumstances, she was hoping for the latter. "I'm listening, Mr. Chen. We've been hearing remarkable things about the financial restructuring work you've been doing since retirement. Word has gotten around about how you saved the Bradley mortgage situation and the innovative trust structure you established. Frankly, we're impressed." Eleanor raised an eyebrow, though David couldn't see it through the phone. "How exactly did word get around about private family financial matters?" "Janet Rodriguez at Desert Financial mentioned your work to our senior partner during a banking conference. She was so impressed with your comprehensive approach that she used your case as an example of proactive family financial planning." The explanation made sense. Janet had always been generous about sharing success stories that might help other families avoid financial crises. But Eleanor was curious about where this conversation was headed. "What kind of proposition are we discussing, Mr. Chen?" "We'd like to offer you a consulting position with our firm. Nothing full-time, of course. But we have clients who could benefit from exactly the kind of expertise you demonstrated with your family's situation." Eleanor felt a spark of interest that surprised her. She'd assumed her banking career was permanently behind her, but the past few months had reminded her how much she enjoyed solving complex financial puzzles. What would this consulting work involve? Primarily working with families who are facing mortgage compliance issues, estate planning challenges, or multi-generational wealth management decisions. Cases that require someone with your combination of banking expertise and personal experience in family financial dynamics. The offer was intriguing, but Eleanor had learned long ago to thoroughly investigate opportunities before committing to anything. "I'll need to think about this, Mr. Chen, and I'll need to discuss it with my family." "Of course. Take all the time you need. I'll send over some information about our firm and the specific types of cases we're hoping you might handle." After ending the call, Eleanor sat quietly in her office, processing the unexpected development. The past 3 months had been focused on solidifying their family's financial foundation and adjusting to their new living arrangements. The house addition was nearly complete, giving her the private space she'd requested while maintaining easy access to the main family areas. But more importantly, her relationship with Michael and Stephanie had evolved into something she'd never quite imagined possible. They'd become genuine partners in managing not just their immediate financial needs, but in building a legacy that would benefit future generations. The question now was whether she was ready to expand that expertise beyond her family to help other people facing similar challenges. That evening, she brought up David Chen's offer during their weekly family financial meeting. These sessions had become a cornerstone of their new household routine, with all 3 of them reviewing budgets, investment performance, and long-term planning goals. "A consulting position?" Michael looked up from the budget spreadsheet Stephanie had prepared. "Mom, that sounds like it could be really rewarding." "It also sounds like it could be very demanding," Stephanie added, though her tone carried interest rather than concern. "What kind of time commitment would they be expecting?" Eleanor appreciated how naturally Stephanie now considered the impact of major decisions on their household dynamics. It was a level of thoughtfulness that had been completely absent during their early interactions. David mentioned it wouldn't be full-time. Probably project-based work with families who need intensive financial restructuring. The kind of situations where someone needs more than just investment advice. "Like we needed," Michael said quietly. "Exactly like you needed. Though hopefully I could help other families before their situations become quite as crisis-oriented as yours was." Eleanor pulled out the information packet David had sent over, spreading the materials across their dining room table. Arizona Wealth Management was a boutique firm specializing in high-net-worth families and complex estate planning. Their client base included entrepreneurs, retirees, and multi-generational family businesses. Their typical cases involve families with assets between $2 million and $20 million who need help with tax planning, succession issues, or financial education for younger family members, Eleanor explained. Stephanie leaned forward, studying the client profiles with the analytical attention Eleanor had taught her to apply to financial documents. "These are the kinds of families who probably think they have everything under control until they discover they don't." "That's exactly right." Wealth doesn't automatically create financial wisdom. Sometimes it actually prevents people from learning important lessons because they can afford to make expensive mistakes. Michael closed the budget folder and gave Eleanor his full attention. "Mom, what do you want to do? Not what you think we want you to do, but what would make you happy?" The question was one Eleanor had been asking herself since David's call. Retirement had given her the luxury of time with family and the satisfaction of seeing their financial transformation succeed. But she'd also discovered that she missed the intellectual challenge of solving complex financial problems for people who genuinely needed her expertise. "I think I'd like to try it," she said finally. "But only if we can structure it in a way that doesn't interfere with our family priorities. You two and this household come first." "Eleanor," Stephanie said, using the formal name that had evolved into a term of respect rather than distance, "I think you should absolutely do it. You've taught us so much over the past few months, and now other families could benefit from that same knowledge." "Besides," Michael added with a grin, "we're not going anywhere. If you take on too much, we'll just have to stage an intervention." Eleanor laughed, appreciating how comfortable they'd all become with discussing family dynamics that would have been sources of tension just months earlier. Over the following weeks, Eleanor negotiated a consulting arrangement with Arizona Wealth Management that gave her complete control over her schedule and case selection. She would work with no more than 3 families at a time, focusing on situations that required intensive financial restructuring or crisis management. Her first case came with a complexity that reminded her why she'd been so successful during her banking career. The Hendersons were a Phoenix family who'd inherited a small real estate empire from the grandfather, but the 3 adult children couldn't agree on management strategies, tax planning, or succession arrangements. "The problem," explained Sarah Henderson during their initial meeting, "is that my brothers want to sell everything and split the proceeds, but I think we should modernize the business and keep it in the family." Eleanor reviewed the portfolio of properties, financial statements, and legal documents the family had provided. The grandfather had built an impressive collection of commercial and residential properties, but the management structure was outdated, and the tax planning was almost non-existent. "What's driving your brother's desire to sell?" Eleanor asked. "They're both facing financial pressure in their own businesses. David's restaurant chain is struggling with pandemic recovery, and Robert's construction company is dealing with supply chain issues. They see the real estate as a way to solve their immediate cash flow problems." Eleanor recognized the pattern immediately. It was similar to what she'd seen with Michael and Stephanie. People making long-term financial decisions based on short-term pressures, without fully understanding the implications of their choices. "Have any of you done a comprehensive analysis of what selling would actually net each family member after taxes and transaction costs?" Sarah's expression suggested she hadn't, which was exactly what Eleanor had expected. Families facing financial stress rarely took the time to fully analyze their options before rushing towards solutions that seemed obvious. Over the next month, Eleanor applied the same systematic approach she'd used with Michael and Stephanie's situation. She brought in tax specialists, estate planning attorneys, and property management experts to create a comprehensive picture of the Henderson family's options. The analysis revealed that selling the real estate empire would generate significantly less cash than the brothers expected, while restructuring the business could provide steady income for all 3 families while preserving the long-term wealth-building potential of the properties. But more importantly, Eleanor discovered that the family's disagreements weren't really about money. They were about control, respect, and old resentments that had been festering for years. "David, you're not just worried about your restaurant's cash flow," Eleanor said during a family meeting that had required all her diplomatic skills to arrange. "You're worried that Sarah doesn't respect your business experience because she's the only one with a formal business education. And Robert, you're not just concerned about construction costs. You're frustrated that Sarah makes decisions about the properties without consulting you, even though you're the one who actually understands building maintenance and improvements." Eleanor had spent weeks talking individually with each family member, using skills she'd developed during decades of mediating between conflicting parties in loan negotiations. "Sarah, you're not just committed to keeping the business in the family. You're afraid that selling means abandoning your grandfather's legacy and that your brothers don't understand the emotional value of what he built. The recognition that their conflict was about more than money opened the door to solutions that addressed everyone's actual concerns rather than just their stated positions. Eleanor helped them restructure the business to give each sibling meaningful control over different aspects of the operation, while implementing financial systems that provided regular income to help with their immediate needs. The success of the Henderson case led to referrals from other families facing similar challenges. Eleanor found herself working with a retired couple whose adult children were fighting over an inheritance they hadn't even received yet, a widow who needed help protecting her assets from a son-in-law she didn't trust, and a multi-generational farming family trying to navigate succession planning while dealing with market volatility. Each case reinforced lessons Eleanor had learned during her banking career about the intersection of money and family dynamics. Financial problems were rarely just about numbers. They were about fear, control, respect, and the complex emotions that surrounded families' relationships with wealth and security. But the consulting work also provided something Eleanor hadn't expected: validation that her expertise had value beyond her own family circle. Michael and Stephanie had needed her knowledge to solve their immediate crisis, but other families were seeking her out specifically because of her reputation for understanding both the technical and emotional aspects of family financial planning. "You know what I love about this work?" Eleanor told Michael and Stephanie during one of their weekly financial meetings. "I'm helping families avoid the kind of crisis you went through. I'm teaching them lessons before they get to the point where their homes are at risk." "It's like preventative medicine," Stephanie observed. "Except instead of preventing illness, you're preventing financial disasters." "Exactly. And the families I'm working with are learning the same lessons you learned about the importance of planning, communication, and realistic budgeting." Michael smiled, the expression carrying pride in what they'd accomplished together. "Mom, do you realize that our family crisis turned into a business opportunity that's helping other families avoid similar problems?" Eleanor hadn't thought about it in exactly those terms, but Michael was right. Their personal transformation had become a template for helping other families navigate complex financial challenges. The strategic thinking she'd applied to saving their mortgage had evolved into a systematic approach for family financial crisis management. But perhaps most importantly, her consulting work had reinforced the value of the partnership structure they'd created at home. Eleanor could pursue meaningful professional work because she had Stephanie managing day-to-day household finances and Michael providing stable income through his restructured business. They'd become a true family enterprise, with each member contributing their strengths to support the other's goals and ambitions. 6 months after David Chen's initial call, Eleanor Patterson had established herself as one of Phoenix's most sought-after family financial consultants. But more importantly, she'd demonstrated that retirement didn't have to mean withdrawal from meaningful work. It could mean applying decades of expertise in new ways that created value for both her family and her community. The woman who'd once been dismissed as being in the way was now helping other families understand that experience and wisdom were among the most valuable assets they could leverage in building lasting financial security. 18 months after the kitchen fire that had changed everything, Eleanor Patterson stood in the grand foyer of the Phoenix Country Club, accepting congratulations from Arizona's banking elite at the annual Financial Excellence Awards ceremony. The crystal trophy in her hands read, "Lifetime Achievement in Family Financial Services," but what made the moment truly meaningful wasn't the recognition. It was seeing Michael and Stephanie at the front of the audience, beaming with pride at her accomplishment. "Ladies and gentlemen," the presenter continued, "Mrs. Patterson has redefined what retirement can look like for financial professionals. Her innovative approach to family wealth management has helped dozens of Arizona families avoid financial crisis while building multi-generational prosperity." The applause was warm and sustained, but Eleanor's attention was focused on the table where her family sat. Stephanie was discreetly wiping away tears, while Michael looked like he might burst with pride. But it was the third person at their table who truly represented the magnitude of their transformation. 18-month-old Emma Bradley, their daughter, sleeping peacefully in her mother's arms despite the noise of the celebration. Eleanor's mind drifted back to the conversation she'd had with Stephanie just 2 weeks after Emma's birth, when the new mother had asked a question that revealed how completely their relationship had evolved. "Eleanor, I want Emma to grow up understanding money the way you understand it. Will you teach her what you've taught us?" The request had moved Eleanor to tears, not just because of the trust it represented, but because it confirmed that their family's financial transformation would extend to the next generation. Emma would never know the anxiety of mortgage compliance crises, or the stress of living beyond one's means. She would grow up in a household where financial wisdom was valued and shared, where experience was respected rather than dismissed. As the ceremony concluded and guests began moving toward the reception area, Eleanor was approached by a familiar figure. Janet Rodriguez from Desert Financial Trust made her way through the crowd with the determined smile of someone who had important news to share. "Eleanor, congratulations on the award. It's so well deserved." "Thank you, Janet. Though I have to say, none of this would have happened without that initial meeting about Michael's mortgage compliance." Janet's expression grew serious, the look of someone preparing to share information that might be sensitive. "Actually, that's what I wanted to talk to you about. There's something you should know about that situation." Eleanor raised an eyebrow, intrigued by Janet's tone. "Do you remember when I told you that our monitoring systems had flagged Michael's account for review?" "Of course. The insurance cancellation and income variance triggered your compliance protocols." Janet shook her head slowly. "Eleanor, our systems didn't flag that account. I personally requested the review after receiving a call from someone expressing concerns about the family's financial stability." The revelation hit Eleanor like a physical blow. Someone had deliberately initiated the review that had led to their mortgage crisis. But who would have had access to enough information about Michael and Stephanie's situation to raise credible concerns with their lender? "Janet, who made that call?" "I can't reveal the caller's identity due to privacy regulations, but I can tell you that it was someone who claimed to have detailed knowledge of the borrower's financial difficulties and personal circumstances." Eleanor's mind raced through the possibilities. Very few people had been privy to Michael and Stephanie's financial struggles before the crisis erupted. The timing suggested it had to be someone who'd observed their lifestyle versus their actual income, someone who'd recognized the unsustainable nature of their spending patterns. Was the caller someone from within the banking industry? No, it was someone who identified themselves as a concerned family member. The phrase hit Eleanor with stunning clarity. A concerned family member with detailed knowledge of Michael and Stephanie's financial situation. Someone who would have had reasons to initiate a review that would expose their problems. Her own actions over the past 18 months suddenly took on a different dimension. She'd assumed her strategic response to Stephanie's dismissive treatment had been reactive, a response to being marginalized and disrespected. But what if her subconscious had been planning something far more comprehensive from the very beginning? Eleanor excused herself from Janet and found a quiet corner of the country club where she could process this revelation in private. Her phone buzzed with a text from Stephanie. "We're so proud of you. Emma slept through the whole ceremony. Ready to head home whenever you are." Home. The word carried layers of meaning that would have been impossible to imagine 18 months ago. The house addition had been completed 6 months earlier, giving Eleanor a beautiful private suite that connected to the main house through a conservatory filled with the herbs and flowers she'd always loved growing. She had her independence, but she was never isolated from the family activities that had become the center of her life. But more than the physical space, she'd found an emotional home in the partnership she'd built with Michael and Stephanie. They'd become true collaborators in managing not just their family's finances, but in building a legacy that would benefit Emma and any siblings she might eventually have. The consulting business had grown beyond Eleanor's wildest expectations. Arizona Wealth Management had offered her a full partnership, which she declined in favor of maintaining her independence while handling select cases that particularly interested her. Her reputation for resolving family financial conflicts had spread throughout the Southwest, and she now had a waiting list of families seeking her expertise. But perhaps the most satisfying aspect of her new career was the teaching component she'd recently added. Twice a month, Eleanor conducted seminars for retirees who wanted to maintain active roles in their family's financial management. The workshops covered everything from estate planning to investment oversight to the delicate art of providing financial guidance without creating family conflicts. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was teaching other retirees how to avoid being marginalized by their families, a situation she'd faced herself not so long ago. As she made her way back to the reception, Eleanor was stopped by David Chen, her original contact at Arizona Wealth Management, who was accompanied by a woman she didn't recognize. "Eleanor, I'd like you to meet Dr. Sarah Martinez from the University of Arizona. She's been following your work and has an interesting proposition." Dr. Martinez was probably in her 50s, with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to academic environments. "Mrs. Patterson, I direct the university's Center for Family Business Studies. We've been impressed by your innovative approaches to multi-generational wealth management." "Thank you, Dr. Martinez. How can I help you?" "We'd like to invite you to serve as a visiting lecturer in our graduate program. Specifically, we want to develop a course on family financial dynamics that would combine your practical experience with academic research on wealth psychology and family systems." Eleanor felt a familiar spark of intellectual excitement. Teaching had always been one of her favorite aspects of banking work, and the opportunity to formalize her expertise into academic curriculum was intriguing. "What kind of time commitment would you be looking at?" "One class per semester, plus supervising student research projects related to family financial planning. We're particularly interested in your work on financial crisis intervention and the psychological aspects of wealth management." As they discussed the details of the potential academic appointment, Eleanor realized that her career transformation was continuing to evolve in unexpected directions. From banking executive to family financial consultant to university lecturer, each role building on the expertise she'd developed during the previous phase. Later that evening, as the family gathered in the conservatory for what had become their traditional post-event debriefing, Eleanor shared Dr. Martinez's offer with Michael and Stephanie. "A university appointment?" Michael looked up from where he was gently rocking Emma in her carrier. "Mom, that's incredible. You'd be teaching graduate students about family financial management?" "It seems that way, though I have to admit, the idea of being back in a classroom environment is both exciting and intimidating." Stephanie set down the coffee she'd been preparing and turned to face Eleanor with an expression that carried deep sincerity. "Eleanor, do you realize what you've accomplished over the past year and a half? I've been fortunate to find meaningful work that builds on my experience." "No, it's more than that. You've created an entirely new field of expertise. When you started consulting, nobody was doing comprehensive family financial crisis intervention. Now you're being asked to teach it at the university level." Eleanor considered Stephanie's observation. It was true that her approach to family financial consulting had been largely innovative, combining traditional banking expertise with family therapy insights and crisis management strategies. The success of her cases had demonstrated that families needed more than just investment advice. They needed someone who understood the emotional and psychological aspects of money management. "I suppose what I've learned is that financial problems are usually family problems in disguise," Eleanor mused. "When families can address the underlying dynamics, the money issues often resolve themselves naturally." "Like ours did," Michael said quietly. "Like yours did. Though I have to confess something to both of you." Eleanor had been debating whether to share Janet Rodriguez's revelation about the mortgage review. The information wouldn't change anything about their current situation, but honesty had become a cornerstone of their relationship. "Janet told me tonight that the bank review of your mortgage wasn't triggered by their monitoring systems. Someone called to express concerns about your financial stability." Stephanie's eyes widened. "Someone called the bank about us? Who would do that?" "Someone who identified themselves as a concerned family member." The silence that followed was profound, as both Michael and Stephanie processed the implications of what Eleanor had revealed. "Mom," Michael said slowly, "are you saying you called the bank about our mortgage?" Eleanor met her son's eyes with the steady gaze she'd perfected during 4 decades of difficult conversations. "I'm saying that someone who cared about your family's future recognized that you were heading for a crisis and took steps to ensure that crisis happened in a controlled environment where help was available." "You orchestrated the whole thing," Stephanie whispered, but her tone carried awe rather than anger. "I recognized that you were living unsustainably and that something needed to change before you lost everything. The insurance cancellation and income variance were real problems that were going to surface eventually. I simply ensured they surfaced at a time when someone with expertise was available to help you navigate the solutions." Michael was quiet for several minutes, gently rocking Emma while processing this new understanding of their family's transformation. When he finally spoke, his voice carried gratitude rather than resentment. You saved us from ourselves. I helped you save yourselves. There's an important difference. Stephanie moved to sit closer to Eleanor, her expression carrying the respect and affection that had developed between them over the months of working together. Eleanor, when I said you were in the way that first week, I had no idea that being in the way of our financial destruction was exactly what we needed. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for family is refuse to enable their self-destructive patterns, but that requires having the courage to risk temporary conflict for the sake of long-term well-being. As they talked late into the evening, with Emma sleeping peacefully in her father's arms, Eleanor reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought them to this moment. What had begun as a temporary housing arrangement during a personal crisis had evolved into a comprehensive transformation of their family's financial future. But more importantly, it had demonstrated something that Eleanor had tried to teach countless borrowers during her banking career. That crisis could be an opportunity for growth if people were willing to face their problems honestly and learn from those who had more experience. There's something else I want to discuss with both of you, Eleanor said as the evening wound down. Emma's college fund. She pulled out a folder she'd prepared earlier in the week, containing documents that outlined a comprehensive education savings strategy that would ensure Emma never faced the kind of financial stress that had nearly destroyed her parents' marriage. I've established a 529 education savings plan that will cover not just Emma's undergraduate education, but graduate school and potentially professional development throughout her career. The fund will be managed as part of the family trust, with contributions from all three of us. Eleanor, that's incredibly generous, Stephanie said, reviewing the documentation with the analytical skills Eleanor had taught her. It's incredibly practical. One of the best investments we can make is ensuring that Emma has the financial education and resources to make good decisions throughout her life. Michael looked up from the sleeping baby in his arms. You know what I hope for Emma? I hope she grows up understanding that money is a tool for building security and opportunities, not a source of stress or conflict. She will, Eleanor said with certainty, because she's growing up in a household where financial wisdom is valued and shared, where problems are addressed honestly, and where experience is respected rather than dismissed. As they prepared to retire for the evening, Eleanor stood in the conservatory, looking out at the desert landscape that surrounded their home. The house addition had created exactly the kind of multi-generational living arrangement she'd envisioned: independence with connection, privacy with family involvement. But the true success of their transformation wasn't visible in the beautiful architecture or the comprehensive financial planning. It was evident in the way Michael and Stephanie had learned to value wisdom and experience, the way they'd embraced financial discipline as empowerment rather than restriction, and the way they were preparing to pass those lessons on to their daughter. 3 weeks later, Eleanor stood in a University of Arizona classroom, looking out at 25 graduate students who were eager to learn about family financial dynamics. Her first lecture was titled, Crisis as Catalyst: How Financial Emergencies Can Strengthen Family Systems. How many of you, she began, have ever heard a family member say that an older relative was in the way of their preferred lifestyle? Several hands went up around the classroom. And how many of you have considered that sometimes being in the way of destructive patterns is exactly where family members need to be? More hands rose, along with expressions of curiosity about where this line of questioning was leading. Today, we're going to explore how family financial crises often stem from deeper issues of respect, communication, and the value we place on experience and wisdom. We're going to examine case studies where strategic intervention prevented family financial disasters. And we're going to discuss how love sometimes requires the courage to risk temporary conflict for long-term well-being. As Eleanor began sharing her expertise with the next generation of family financial professionals, she realized that her own transformation was still continuing. From banking executive to family crisis consultant to university educator, each role had built on the previous one while opening new opportunities for growth and service. But perhaps most importantly, she'd demonstrated that age and experience weren't limitations to be managed, but assets to be leveraged for the benefit of families and communities. The woman who'd once been told she was in the way was now teaching others how to use their expertise to help families build lasting financial security. The lesson, Eleanor reflected as she began her first university lecture, was beautifully simple. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to get out of the way when people you love are heading toward disaster. Sometimes love requires the courage to be an obstacle to destructive patterns, even when that makes you temporarily unpopular. And sometimes, if you're patient and strategic enough, you can transform being in the way into being exactly where you need to be to make a lasting difference. Eleanor Patterson had spent 18 months proving that retirement didn't have to mean withdrawal from meaningful work. It could mean applying decades of expertise in innovative ways that created value for families and communities. Her story had become a template for other retirees who wanted to remain active contributors to their family's success rather than passive recipients of care and consideration. The mortgage crisis that had nearly destroyed Michael and Stephanie's marriage had become the foundation for a thriving consulting practice, a university teaching appointment, and most importantly, a family partnership that would benefit generations to come. Sometimes, Eleanor had learned, the best way to respond to being told you're in the way is to get strategically in the way of people's problems, rather than out of the way of their lives. And sometimes, if you're skilled enough and patient enough, you can transform temporary crisis into permanent positive change. As she concluded her first lecture to enthusiastic applause from her graduate students, Eleanor smiled with the satisfaction of someone who discovered that her most important work had begun at an age when most people assumed their contributions were finished. The revolution that had started in a Scottsdale kitchen was now spreading to classrooms, consulting offices, and family financial planning sessions throughout Arizona. And Eleanor Patterson, at 74 years old, was just getting started. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.